We're probably getting really exhausted at this point, but I wanted to introduce a project that we're working on, but first just tell you a little change in the program. People migrated over to the coffee break before this panel instead of after, which is perfectly fine, but we do want to end almost on time. So once I finish speaking now, I probably won't speak half an hour. We're going to just move into the final panel discussion. And there's only one panel discussion because we moved one of them to the morning because someone was leaving early. So just so you know, the final one will be how our media landscape's changing. So I hope people also stay for that. So there was a little break in the program here, and I thought it would be a good opportunity to introduce a project that we're working on because we've been talking throughout the conference about a lot of the problems and propaganda and the lack of quality journalism. So this is one part of a potential solution. It's a project that we've been developing now for a couple of years, but we'll finally be launching in a few months. And our idea is essentially a crowdfunding platform to support journalists working in countries where the press is severely restricted. So we're focusing on largely the developing world, countries in transition. I think instead of explaining the basics, I'll show you the video that we've prepared. We'll be launching next week our own campaign to raise funding for our platform because we do have some seed money from the National Endowment for Democracy, but we're going to need more funds to keep the platform going into the future. So we're doing crowdfunding for crowdfunding, and we were planning to launch the campaign on Monday. Obviously now with the events in France, it's probably not going to be such a good idea. But what I'll show you is just a video and then maybe explain some more and see if you have any questions. Okay.
Imagine a world without freedom of the press. This world exists for 6 billion people. Over 85% of the world's population lives in countries where journalists are restricted. In fact, the degree of global press freedom sharply dropped in 2014 to reach its lowest point in more than a decade. This is the most deadly and dangerous period for journalists in recent history. But there are brave journalists who are resisting political and financial pressures and telling the truth in spite of the obstacles.
It can be dangerous when you are telling stories that high-profile people, very wealthy people don't want you to tell.
We as journalists have the role not to take sides, but to report about the truth.
Many African leaders consider the press to be their enemy. They use repression to get rid of journalists and the independent media. It's like a crime to denounce corruption in the media.
There's actually very little funding available to do this kind of journalism in Lebanon that is investigative and takes time and effort.
That's where Press Start, a new journalism crowdfunding platform, comes in. The site will be focused solely on supporting journalists where the press cannot report freely. Past experiments in crowdfunding journalism have usually limited their ambitions to raising funds for a single article, investigation, or photo reportage. But Press Start will raise funds for series of content, providing support for a longer period of time.
Political, business, or criminal interests in many countries intimidate journalists or otherwise restrict their access to information.
When the powerful silence independent journalists, bad things happen. Honest reporting holds them to account.
Initiatives such as Press Start can help journalists to get sources of funding they need to remain independent.
It's not just about encouraging journalists to be brave enough to do their jobs under very tough conditions. It's about giving them the means to do that job, giving them access to the financing, giving them access to the kind of publishing platform that allows them to tell the important stories about their countries.
Some of us involved in this project have been running journalism training programs for almost 20 years. Thousands of journalists have passed through our programs. Those experiences have taught us what it's like working with journalists who face repression on almost a daily basis. We've designed a platform specifically tailored to their needs.
And beyond getting them set up on Press Start, We'll be connecting them to the communities around the world that believe in a free flow of information and its importance to democracy.
At this point, we're close to finishing the website prototype and we've got just enough funding to launch, but we need you to help us to keep Press Start going until we can cover our costs.
Press Start and make stories that would go unreported come to life.
Some of the basics. This, as you can see, is a real experiment because what we're trying to do is see if we personalize, individualize the journalists who are out there on the front lines doing this type of work can elicit empathy or sympathy from people around the world who will be contributing small amounts of money, which together would hopefully be funding investigations, feature stories, and things like that. So it really hasn't been tried on this level. Most of the crowdfunding for journalism has usually been someone going on Kickstarter or another platform and trying to raise money to go off to cover a war or ecological catastrophe or something like that. To do it on with this type of approach hasn't really been tried, especially trying to individualize it and personalize it. So what we'll really be trying to do, and you can see a little bit of it here, is to try to personalize, as I said, the people behind the work, but that it shouldn't be seen as charity. It's not simply a journalist going up on the platform to get people to give them money, but they will be doing real work and will commit to a certain package of articles. So we'll be raising the same amount of money for everyone. It will be $2,000. And then they will commit to a certain amount of content that they have to produce with that money over the course of 4 months. So we're starting off predominantly with Eastern Europe, but not solely, simply because that's the region we know best. But the first crop of journalists that we hope to go up there, I think probably will start in January. I think it's getting quite late in the year to start in December. But we're looking at journalists from Belarus, Ukraine, Macedonia, Lebanon, Honduras, Afghanistan, and Congo. So a real mix, and we'll be experimenting to see what type of pitches work best and so on. But that's the plan. The other idea here, probably all of you understand that, but it's kind of a market correction in a way, because this type of journalism, it's really tough to support locally, just with local resources, because of financial pressures, political pressures, and all of that. So in a way, we're asking for the crowd around the world to sponsor the local quality stuff, which on its own would have a tough time existing. So that's the basics. Any questions at all about what we're trying to do or the approach or any feedback? Yes.
To the public.
You mean what's produced or just the platform?
Well, mainly what's going to come out of it in terms of where is it going to be, where will their products end up,
right.
And if somebody's going to be the audience for this, how is it going to be distinguished from other things that like the Global Voices project?
Yeah, well, we're assuming the vast majority of content will be in local languages and local publications. So it's not to support people writing for us, or our RFE is also a partner. We've got about 15 partners so far. The role of the partners is to identify the journalists, to help us find kind of the best and bravest out there who we can count on. So not any journalist will be able to apply and go up there. Everyone will be vetted in a way and always vouched for by a specific partner. But then what they produce will be produced locally and for local audiences. Occasionally people, as I said, might write for us or others, but which would help raise awareness around the world about local issues. But the real goal is to support local journalism. Every month we'll be taking a selection of articles that we think would appeal to an international audience and publishing selections so people get to see to some extent what they're funding. But we don't have the capacity to translate everything. So we will be posting everything, but only selections in English on the kind of publication side of the website.
So the target is the home countries in which they're operating.
Yeah, yeah. But again, the goal is also obviously to encourage funding abroad and for people to see that their funding is going to a good cause. So the plan is to do something like an impact report for every package of articles that is funded. So a donor will not just learn they've funded 10 articles, but that what actually happened because those articles were published. Was an issue raised that otherwise would not have been raised? Were there policy debates? If it was an investigation, was anyone charged? What developed? So people can actually see that the journalism produced some effect. And the partners would be helping also to track that, as well as the journalists. That will be part of their obligation. They get the funding, but they will also have to report back on what happened because they received the funding. Yes?
Are you in touch with the Open Society Foundation Journalism Program then?
Not yet, but I know that they have a new priority on supporting investigations. Yeah. So
they've reoriented recently from general media stuff to very much this, so they might be a partner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a good idea. Yeah, most of the partners are rather local investigative journalism centers or media development organizations. Radio Free Europe is probably the biggest partner to date. We've been talking to Deutsche Welle as well, but they're the largest one. And just to make clear, it's not only freelancers we'll be targeting. So the idea is also you might have some struggling small independent publications, and they would be able to nominate their journalists as well. And instead of having to pay them, we will be essentially paying them, or the crowd. So that's also part of our intention. So the next step is really, we're launching a campaign, as I said, on Kickstarter. I guess we'll be doing it toward the end of next week. It was planned for Monday, but obviously there are other things in the news today. So we want to get the word out as much as possible. Yes, Chris?
Who has ultimate editorial responsibility for what's produced? You or the kind of host, like RFE?
It will be the journalists' publications. So obviously this is going to be difficult to monitor everything in that way. That's one of the reasons why we're going to be very strict with actually who goes up and who gets the funding. And the hope is that the partner organizations will be doing some of the monitoring, and then again we'll be taking selections and translating those. But this question's come up also about what do we do in countries where the press is so repressed that it's really hard to identify true independent journalism, like a country like Kazakhstan or Azerbaijan, places like that. Are we going to support opposition journalism, which might not be up to, say, the standards of most international publications, but we'll have to make that clear to the donors that we still think it's important to support this type of journalism to provide an alternative, although it has to be taken into consideration what context those journalists are working under. So, yes?
Will you be supporting cross-country investigation?
Yeah, I think we'd like to. I think that's probably a second step. But definitely, especially with investigations, we realize that even though the culture is not really like that yet, at least in this part of the world, that team reporting would also be deserving of funding. So to put teams up there and also working on cross-border investigations would be, I think, fair game. So we'll see. And also, it's a question of will we support things in countries which are not labeled by most monitoring organizations as countries without free media, but still have problems with their media. So in this part of the region, right now the Czech Republic is still classified as one of the freer countries. Whether the situation deteriorates to a point that we would support journalism here, I don't know, but definitely Hungary right now, we're talking about some Hungarian journalists to put up on the platform. And also, we have a long-running program supporting Roma journalists, and they have difficulty getting funding. So I could see even in a country like the Czech Republic, which otherwise has a free media, that we would support marginalized communities that have difficulty raising funding for their type of journalism. So that's the plan. So if there are no other questions, thank you for listening to the brief introduction. Please spread the word when we do finally launch, and let us know your feedback. As I said, this is an experiment, and we don't know. We might have to adjust the model here and there, but I think our belief is, especially today, that people are looking for these bigger social change projects. So for this to work, it has to really expand beyond people like you, kind of free press advocates, and also tap into the innovation crowd, the social change crowd. Because if this works, it could really revolutionize how organizations, journalists are funded in the developing world, countries in transition, where there are a lot of struggling freelance journalists, independent publications, and all of that. But we do know we have to get a much wider audience for that to happen. So, thanks. Did we a final question?
Yeah, I'm just curious. Will the list of donors or people who support the investigation be available, or will it be anonymous?
We want to encourage people to give their names, but also give an option for people to be anonymous if they want. But we will be seeing the names because of the credit card donations. So it's definitely, we want to be on the lookout if someone's trying to game the system, and it would look suspicious if one particular donor, say, keeps contributing huge amounts of money. But we are placing a cap on the amount that any one donor can contribute. So both, I mean, largely for perception purposes. So I think we set it at 25%. We'll see if that works. So I guess that's it for me. I don't know, Graham, did you want to say anything? Graham over here from the U.S., we met during 2 years ago at an incubator for this project, which was over at the Global Media Forum, and Graham has kindly been advising us on the project as well. So I don't know if you want to say anything or not.
I'll just, I think, reinforce one piece of this, which is that this is experimental. I think it's a very important experiment, and the point is to actually find ways to fund the practice of journalism as opposed to the product of journalism. And I think this has been a dilemma, to put it a kind way, with the disruption of the business models of media, that it's practicing or committing quality acts of journalism is very expensive because it doesn't always lead to something that is a product for the public, but it's essential for civic society that we figure this out. So our hope is, at the very least, to learn something about the potential to fund this practice. So.
Just one thing to pick up there. I think in many ways it's also just a response to the work we've been doing at TOL for the last 16 years. Is we really have trained all these journalists, and they're really smart people. They've got all these skills, but many times they'll go back home and they still won't have money to do the work that they want to do. And it's very difficult for donors to give grants to individual journalists to do their work. Even publications is rather risky, especially if the publication changes hands and so on. So in a way, it's just kind of a lot of different micro grants to journalists who we've identified along with our partners as deserving of that kind of funding, and the type of funding which, as I said, a traditional donor would be very difficult for them to do that. So that's it. So I guess we're going to continue here for the next panel. Are we moving? Okay. Okay, so a little more cozy in that room. So we'll move over there. That'll be the final panel, and then we'll finish up with a glass of wine before you all depart. So thank you.